This is going to be the start of the new series with Morphe. This can be used for lessons, for those trying to get to 1,000, or even schools. Hope you enjoy the game. This is going to be our first one of the series, as I said. This one is about controlling the center. We're talking about controlling the center. We're talking about these four squares right here, E4, E5, and D4 and D5. Although Dr. Habez Carr is a decent chess player, he does not know about chess strategies, and that's why he loses his game very bad against Paul Morphy. In fact, in this game, Paul Morphy is doing a simultaneous exhibition, which means this is the probably one of 10 to 15 games that he's playing. Let's see how it goes. Morphy always likes to start up with E4, best by test, as Fischer used to say. Pawn H6, you can see here that Dr. Habezkar is not controlling the center, and he's just putting up a pawn up on the side here. Again, not the best strategy. What's better than one pawn in the center? Hopefully you see the move. Here we go. Two pawns in the center, pawn to D4. You can see with just these two moves already, both bishops can be allowed into the game. Rather, when you play a wing pawn over here, it doesn't control the center, and it's not letting out any pieces. Here we go. Pawn A5, another move not controlling the center. Although this one does allow a piece to get developed, and you'll see this with a lot of beginner players too. What move can be played out? The rook. Unfortunately, if the rook does go to a6 here, it's just going to be a bad move because hopefully you see which piece can capture if the rook goes to a6. That's right, the bishop here on f1 can capture. The rook is worth $5, the bishop's worth 3. Just lost $2 in your pocket right there. Well, the next two moves Morphy is going to try and move is going to be his bishop and knight. Typically, we like to develop our knights first, but Morphy has a certain idea in this game, and he plays his bishop to one of the best squares, D3. Now, if you're thinking it's C4, that's also a good place to put it. C4, typically we bring the bishop out to attack on F7. Now, this is a very good rule and very good for a lot of beginners. Whenever you bring your bishop out here, you're trying to attack the king when he's uncastled. Now, Morphy is an experienced player, so he plays it to D3. How is it more experienced? Well, right now it is being blocked by a pawn. It is controlling the center. But the big idea is later on, after pawn to E5 gets played, the bishop will be attacking on H7. And that's a good rule to think about. Whenever your opponent's king is uncastled, attack F7. Whenever they are castled, attack H7. You can see that Morphy is already anticipating or thinking ahead that his opponent is going to castle, which does happen in the game. So bishop D3. Black plays B6, letting out a different piece here. Obviously, rook A6 would be a bad move. But now, hopefully you see the other piece that can be developed now. It's the bishop, right? The bishop can finally be developed either the B7 to attack on E4, or maybe to A6 to try and trade off. What's the next piece Morphy's going to move? Again, we want to castle as soon as possible, so he's going to bring out his knight over here. There's two good squares to move your knight to. You can either go to F3 or E2. The more common place to play is F3, which is a good square because it controls two squares in the center. As long as you don't choose H3, you're doing okay here. Remember, a knight on the rim is grim. So here Morphy chooses, Morphy chooses knight E2 here, again, because he has a specific idea in mind. Black goes ahead and plays, pawn to E6, finally trying to control the center. Notice here, because he took so long to do this, though, he can't even play his pawn to E5. Why? Well, pawn can just take, right? Some free money right here. You can see that Morphy would just have full control over the center, and he could even defend his pawn. Typically, double pawns are bad, but an extra pawn is an extra pawn. So Black is forced to go ahead and play pawn to E6, finally trying to let out his bishop. After this, we're going to go ahead and castle. Of course, king safety is very important. Already, this is a very good position to look at and really start trying to understand chess as far as, well, what did I get done in my last 5 moves? We can see here that Morphy has castled his king, so his king is safe. He's controlled the center. He has 2 pawns developed there. And he also has developed 2 pieces, the bishop and the knight. Let's take a count and see what has Black done. Random move, random move, random move, random pawn move. Again, these pawn moves are not doing too good. They're not controlling the center. This pawn didn't really allow the rook to go anywhere good. I guess you can argue that this pawn was okay because it allows the bishop out. And maybe pawn e5 allowed the rook out. But again, the rooks are not trying to be used in the opening. It's really the knights and bishops that we're trying to develop first. Already, this is a winning position to the trained chess player. Well, what does Black play here? Black's playing by the same rules, so he goes ahead and plays. Bishop to a6, he's trying to develop with a threat. Here he's saying, let's go ahead and trade off bishops. Hopefully you can see the move here. Because we have more pieces out in the game, we don't want to trade them off. These are our attacking pieces. So what's the best move here? What do we play here to control the center and stop the trade? Hopefully you found it. It's actually pawn to c4. Notice if you thought about trading the bishop here, it's not a good idea. Notice we have two pieces out here for white. And, well, black over here only has one. But if we trade bishop takes, knight takes, you see we've definitely lost some of our good potential in this game. Why? We have one out. They have one out. Didn't we have two? There's no need to help out our opponent, so we should not take. So pawn c4 controls the center because it captures diagonally and stops the trade of the bishops. Of course, if the bishop takes, well, this is just a terrible move. We'll just take back. And here black has lost a $3 piece for a $1 piece. Morphy would be happy here. So we continue. Black's going to go ahead and try and develop more pieces. Knight to f6. Although this should be a good move, because we control the center, white now has a very strong move here. Hopefully you can find it. Hopefully you found it. Here, the idea is anytime you control the center, you want to push back your opponent's pieces. And the best way to do that is with your pawns. The move here was pawn to e5 attacking the knight. In fact, there really is no good place for the knight to move to. Knight d5, it's lost by a pawn. Knight e4, bishop's going to take over here. Knight g4 and h5 fall for the same exact idea. Let's go and take a look at the first move, which was knight to g4. First of all, you should not be worried about this move at all because, well, a knight cannot checkmate by themselves. Maybe the queen can come out to help attack, but you can go ahead and push back your opponent that is invading your territory with a simple move here. What do we play? Well, here we just played the simple move, pawn to h3. You can even play pawn to f3 here too, whichever one that you would like to play. The main thing to notice here is, well, where can the knight move to next? Can't go to f2 because the rook, can't go to h2 because the king. e3, well, there's a bishop and a pawn here. Knight takes on e5, losing it again to the pawn. f6, the knight's just trapped. All you have to do here is attack it. Now be careful, if you're thinking about playing something like knight to f4, now this is a good move because you moved your knight and now you're attacking the, you moved your white knight, now the queen's attacking the knight. But here black can defend with something like h5. There are some tactics here, but the easiest route here is just to use a pawn to attack it because it doesn't matter if they do defend it, we're going to be winning some money anyways. The same thing is wrong for this one. What happens if knight h5 gets played? Here we can win it by playing. Hopefully this was easier. Just a simple move, pawn g4. Typically we don't want to move pawns in front of our king, but in this case we'll make an exception. Again, there's really no pieces black has developed to attack us, so we can just go ahead and take it with pawn takes. Next move, there's nothing they can do about it. So because of all these threats, black only had one, I guess, decent move and goes ahead and plays knight to h7. If you're thinking about knight g8, this is not bad. In fact, maybe this is the best move. But the reason why Dr. Habez-Kar went ahead and played the knight to g8 was, to h7 was because he didn't want to get in the way. Black's playing by the same ideas. He wants to bring the bishop out so that he can castle. And if you put the knight back, well, it's going to take longer to go ahead and do that. So Mr. Carr goes ahead and plays knight to h7. And here, a very interesting move by Morphy here. How did we get the rook into the game without even moving it? Seems like an interesting puzzle, doesn't it? Hopefully you found it. We're going to go ahead and play pawn to f4. Notice how, even though we didn't move it, we gave the rook more scope by moving our pawn. In fact, if we play the pawn up, and if we trade off, then this rook just has an open file here, and you can see that it has more squares to control. Morphy has a very good idea in these games of chess he plays. He likes to attack his opponent's king. And you can definitely see that since he's got his bishop aimed over here, the other bishop, the knight, the queen, and he's just added his rook into the fight. Well, what's the next piece black wants to move? Hopefully you see it. He wants to bring out his bishop. Remember, black wants the castle. Well, there's a big problem here. There's really no good squares for it to move to because white controls the center with the pawns. Where should black move his bishop to? Should he go to e7, d6, c5, or b4? a3 is a bit silly. Well, we'll just take over there, right? Well, if you said d6, you missed the pawn. If you said c5, pawn takes again. And so it's down to e7 and b4. Well, if you do play something like bishop b4, not that it's a terrible move, but here Morphy can just kick it away with the move pawn a3, and the game would be almost exactly the same, except he gave a free move. So black went ahead and just played bishop to e7 here. All right, this is one of my favorite questions to ask in this game. How does Morphy bring his queen over to the king side? From the king over to the h file, this is the king side. From the queen over to the A file. This is the queen side. Morphy loves to attack, and one of the best pieces to use is going to be the queen. So how do we bring the queen over to the king side? This is a 2-move maneuver. Hopefully you found it. Now, if you thought it was queen e1, queen g3, I'll give you full points for this. This is a good idea, bringing the queen over to attack an undefended pawn. Although this is not the best idea. Here, the best idea was, hopefully you saw it, knight to g3. How is this better? Well, what's better than bringing one piece over to the king side? Bringing two. Not only did we open up the queen to move over, because now we see the queen can go over to h5, g4, f3, we also brought the knight over, and there's some good squares for it to run to, maybe h5, and maybe even f5 if you can get supported by the pawn. Well, black definitely wants to try and create some counterplay, and instead of castling right away, he tries this move, pawn to d5, which actually is a pretty decent move to play. Well, if you're a very good chess player, you're always going to try to attack first. Notice here, Morphy doesn't even react to the attack of d takes c4 or bishop takes c4. He goes ahead and makes his own threat. Let's develop this queen and attack an undefended pawn. Do we go to f3, g4, or h5? Which one did you choose? Let's take a look. Hopefully you got the right one. If you said queen h5, now you do bring your queen over to the king side. Unfortunately, you're not attacking anything that's undefended, so it's not really a threat. Black can just go ahead and go pawn grabbing over here with maybe d takes c4. Obviously, we can't take the pawn on h6 as pawn on g7 defends, and queen takes f7. We don't have enough attackers here. The king just takes back. Let's see, what else can we play? Queen f3? Not a bad idea. Here we see that we've actually stopped their plan of d takes c4 because the queen can take on a8 over here. Second best move. Here the best move and the move that Morphy plays is queen to g4, attacking the undefended pawn on g7. Well, how did black go ahead and defend his pawn and get his king to safety? He went ahead and castle. Typically, I would say it's a good idea to castle, but you just castled into a very strong attack by Paul Morphy, one of the best chess players in this century. Oof. Black does not last long. In fact, I even go through a side variation here showing how strong it could be. The regular game, black was able to sacrifice back, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and see what would happen with the full potential of Morphy. Let's go ahead and count. How many attackers does white have in this kingside attack? Hopefully you counted. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Morphy has 5 attackers ready to go. Now let's do a count for black. How many defenders does black have? 1, 2, 3. We'll even count this one, 4. So white has 5 attackers, and black has 4 defenders. Anytime you have more attackers than defenders, it's a good idea to attack. In fact, right now we see that queen's already attacking on one of the weak squares, which is g7. Morphy goes ahead and brings in another piece to attack. What move did he play? Hopefully you see it. The queen can't checkmate by herself. Knight to h5. If you thought it was knight f5, be careful. The pawn can just take here. If you played f5, this is another very strong move, as it's going to allow bishop takes on h6. Again, white just has so many pieces here. There's many ways that you can win your game. But the strongest move here is going to play knight to h5. Now here the game actually continued with g5, and Morphy won the game quite easily. Black should not be moving pawns in front of your king. Right now, Morphy is threatening a checkmate in 1. Hopefully you see it. Queen takes g7, check and mate. Notice the king cannot take back because the knight is defending. Here we're just going to do a side variation because I want to end this game kind of fast. Here we're going to see what happens if black plays g6 instead of the g5 move. And here, well, if we can get rid of these pawns in front of the king, we should be able to checkmate. Here Morphy found a nice sacrifice to do that. Did you find it? Here, a sacrifice in chess is whenever you give up a piece of higher value for one of lower value. So hopefully you found the move. It's bishop takes on g6. If you don't take back, you're just losing. F takes on g6, and now checkmate in 2. Queen takes g6, king h1, king h8, and hopefully you see it. Queen to g7, check and mate. Why can't the king take the queen? Well, the knight is defending it. Hopefully you enjoyed this game. This was about controlling the center. Here we saw Paul Morphy use his beautiful pawns to control the center, develop his pieces, and then proceed to a strong kingside attack. I'll see you in the next video.